Greetings builders and welcome back to another best build selection. This is the video where I bring 3 selected builds from a specific topic, and today's team is smoking hot. I'm of course talking about the fire builds, and if you decide to make any of those you can find links for the PoE and complete guide in the video description. The first build of our burning selection is the Infernal Flicker Strike Ascendant with the Scion class. This build uses the unique sword auto sacrifice to sustain the frenzy charges needed for you to keep flickering, but that's not any auto flicker build. This one also chills and shocks your enemies for a lot more damage, clear speed and survivability. To list the pros of this build, I would start of course with its clear speed. Flicker is just incredibly fast and super cool to play. This build also counts with an amazing boss damage and high survivability. Now to list the cons, the first thing that comes to mind is that you are always very close to enemies, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Another issue is that you have little control over your character, making it hard on bosses where you need to mind your position or attack the right enemy. As for budget, you can get it destroying early in the game maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, you need to invest around 120 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines. Don't forget that on PoEbuilds.net you can find a list with all the equipments that you need to buy for this build, with direct links for examples being sold by other players. You need 3 mandatory unique items for this build. The first and most important is the auto sacrifice, that allows you to maintain your frenzy charges always up even while flickering. Next, we also need the Call of the Void ring that causes your attacks to chill and shatter enemies. This ring might be a little expensive during the first days of a new raid, but don't worry, you'll be fine without it while waiting for the prices to drop. Finally, we also need a Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of your damage to shock, causing enemies to take a lot more damage. For clear speed, this build is surely a 10 out of 10. As any other flicker strike, this build is also insanely fast, so fast that some players can't even play it without getting nauseous. The boss damage is great and deserves 9 out of 10. This build achieves high amounts of DPS capable of decimating even the biggest bosses in just a few seconds. Now for the survivability, I'll only give 8 out of 10, just the same as the Cyclone Slayer on the previous video. Even though this build has over 120,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion and spell suppression, I had to take 2 points out because you're always very close to enemies, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Now let's move to another flaming hot build, the Fire Cyclone Berserker with the Marauder class. This build converts 100% of Cyclone's damage into fire damage to clear the endgame maps like an amazing flame tornado. To list the pros of this build, I would start with the clear speed. With Cyclone you never need to stop moving, and the spin to win feeling is just awesome. This build also has a great single target damage with not much investment. Now to list the cons, the main issue of this build is survivability. Even though this build has many defensive layers, it also needs to stay very close to enemies, which is a vulnerable position, and as a berserker you already take 10% increased damage. As for budget, you can get it destroying early in game maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps you need to invest around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas I recommend investing around 4 divines, otherwise your survivability won't be enough and you will end up dying a lot. You need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first one is Gamahu's Flame Axe that already converts 60% of physical damage into fire damage, grants 20% fire penetration and triggers Molten Burst on hit for a lot more single target damage. Following, we also need the Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of our elemental damage to be able to shock, causing enemies to take a lot more damage. For clear speed, this build gets 9 out of 10. As mentioned before, Cyclone is an awesome skill that never stops moving. You just slide through the maps, killing everything that gets near. The boss damage also gets 9 out of 10. Combining the power of your Cyclone hits with all the Molten Burst projectiles, you can achieve a great single target damage capable of destroying even the biggest bosses in just a few seconds. The survivability on the other hand gets 7 out of 10. Even though this build has a great life full, permanent fortify, high armor, high evasion and spell suppression, it's always in a vulnerable position, very close to enemies. That might be a little frustrating if you try high tier maps without investing your survivability. Finally, we have a starter build that is fire itself, the Rytle's Fire Juggernaut with the Marauder class. Here you can use all the tankness and life regeneration from the Juggernaut to easily sustain the Righteous Fire damage and just walk your way through the end game. To list the pros of this build, I'll have to start with how comfortable and smooth this gameplay is. As soon as you get this build sustaining Righteous Fire, you start clearing maps without even noticing. This character is also super tanky and it will be hard to die even if you try to. Now to list the cons, I'll start saying that the boss damage isn't great, but don't worry, you kill map bosses easily even on a low budget, but Guardians and Pinnacle bosses will take longer than usual if you don't invest a few Divine Orbs. Another issue is that the leveling is a little bit complicated since we use a spell as a Marauder, but if you follow closely the steps on the leveling section from the complete guides, you won't have a problem. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 105 chaos, but if you follow the crafting tips on the complete guide, this can get a lot cheaper. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, you need to invest around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines, mostly on your survivability. You need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first are the Legacy of Fury boots. They scorch nearby enemies and cause them to explode for an amazing clear speed. Those boots might be a little bit expensive during the first days of a new league, but don't worry, you'll be fine playing without them until the price drops. The other mandatory unique is the Immortal Flash belt. This one grants a huge amount of life regeneration and even a great armor buff. For clear speed, I'll give this build 10 out of 10. As mentioned before, as soon as this build is complete, you just walk and watch every enemy burn only because of your presence. This means not stopping for casting and saving a lot of time while farming. The boss damage on the other hand is not that great. I would give it just 7 out of 10 because it would need investment to do a decent DPS on Pinnacle bosses and Guardians. But don't worry, this build still kills map bosses easily on a low budget. For the survivability, this build surely has 10 out of 10. As you can see on the POB, this build gets over 100,000 armor, 2000 life regeneration per second, over 87% of all elemental resistance, and even over 50% chance to block spell damage. Look at the effective HP, it goes beyond 200,000. Even if you try to die, it wouldn't be easy. And that's it guys, what did you think about those fire builds? Please take a second to tell me in the comments and leave a thumbs up to support the channel. I wish you guys an amazing day, and don't forget to keep building.